Hi, I'm a professional board game reviewer, and this is the best board game collection in the world. I've been curating these shelves for over 10 years, trying to strike the right balance. I recently culled 100 games from it, and added a few new choice cuts. And now I've organized it by category. Each shelf has a name and a purpose. So I'm going to talk you through them and pick out the flagship game that defines each shelf and an underrated one that deserves some love. If you want to buy any of them, you can support the channel by using the links below. And if you want to hear me talk about every one of these 225 games, there's an extended video exclusive to my patrons. It's a great time to be an Actualol patron. We've got exclusive videos, monthly newsletters, and a Discord community. Come join us on Patreon, link below. My collection is in these three bookcases, and I've created like a sliding scale of difficulty. So you're starting with the really light party games here, then moving through to slightly more complex, and then my heavier games are over this side. We're starting off on a bit of a bad note because this is the Legacy Graveyard. These are 3 Legacy games that I started playing years ago and just remain unfinished and not looking like finishing anytime soon. Risk Legacy I bought 10 years ago, and the 5 friends that I started playing that game with now have 7 children between us, with 1 on the way. We live in 5 different cities across 3 different countries. Maybe if we hadn't played such an aggressive game, we'd be living a bit closer together. But that game is just never going to get finished, and so it just sits on my shelf as a reminder, just collecting dust. I really want to impress upon people out there, don't get into legacy games unless you know what you're doing. I feel like someone trying to ward people off having children, but at least with children, they go to university eventually. I feel like I'm going to be stuck with these forever. This is Gateways to the World. These are some of my favorite gateway board games to get people into modern board games. And the flagship of this shelf is Ticket to Ride. This was my first modern board game, absolutely hooked me on the hobby, and it works for so many people. Such a simple, interesting game to get people started with. So if you're new to modern board games, then Ticket to Ride is the perfect place to start. And Luxor is my underrated pick from this shelf. It's kind of an ugly one. It's about going into an Egyptian temple, trying to collect artifacts, and it's got this nice shared board feel where you're doing your own thing, but other people are kind of getting in your way, and there's this sort of race to the finish vibe where the tension is raising as the game goes on. And I feel like this one just goes under the radar because of how kind of ugly and boring it looks, but it really is worth trying. And I just want to give a shout out here to Trekking Through History, which manages to have no logos or annoying information on the side of the box. As a person who tries to create a perfect collection, this is what I want to see on the side of the box. The name of the game, a bit of artwork, and nothing else. I mean, you can have one side with that information with the company logo if you want, but I've bought this product. This is mine now. Please, can you just give me a side that actually looks good? And so many companies don't bother with that. This shelf is called Party Anthems. These are some definitive party games. And the absolute flagship here is Codenames. This is my favorite game of all time and just one of the best party games ever. Such a brilliant team game where you're trying to communicate words by giving clues of other words. You're trying to combine words together. It's got such a fascinating challenge, at least for me. And I love that it's a team game and you're racing against the other team. An absolute iconic party game and really defined the size that a party game should be. I feel like all party games should come in this box. And that's why I love this shelf so much, because it has some real classics in that same format. The underrated pick is Phantom Inc. This is another team game with guessing words, but one player is playing as a ghost on each team, and they are communicating by answering questions and then writing out one letter at a time. So the other players can only see a few letters from the answer. They're not trying to give away too much to the other team. They're trying to work out what the word is from the first few letters of the clue. Different to the other games, not quite as, thinky or intelligent, but just a lot more sort of immediate fun. Would be really good with anyone, this, but great for families. And if you want to know more about it, it's in my 10 small games video from last year. Just want to point out this barcode. There should never be a barcode on the only side of your box that you're able to put on the shelf. That drives me crazy. Barcodes are not allowed of my board game collection, and yet it has to be there because it's given me no choice. This next shelf I'm calling Party Nibbles. These are very simple, short party games, and the flagship here is Anomia, an absolute blast of a game where you are trying to say the thing the quickest. So you're all flipping cards, and then at a certain point you'll both have to shout something out, and you need to say the name of a breakfast cereal and they need to say the name of a famous novelist, and you just can't get it out quick enough, and whoever says their thing first wins the cards and gets points. It's a loud game, super simple. It just creates a really fun time. I've never really had a bad game of Anomia, and I would recommend it to everyone. And the underrated pick is How Dare You, which is a really small party game from last year that plays on the trivia of numbers. So you have a question like, what percentage of people have a name starting with J in the US? And you have to make a guess. And then you go around the circle and raise on that guess until someone thinks, no, they've called too high, and then they call them out. Then you reveal the answer, which in this case is 11%. Super simple, but I just love those sorts of questions. They get you thinking, they create interesting discussions at the end, you sort of learn something together. So I've played other games like this that do trivia with numbers, but this one just does it in a tiny box that you can take anywhere, and that's what's so great about it. This shelf is called There's a Party on the Cards because it's more card-based party games. And the flagship here is Push. There's quite a few Push Your Luck games on these shelves, and Push is probably the definitive one for me. Just a really simple card flipping game, you know, whether you stick or twist. But what I love about this is that it brings in the other players. If you end up taking on too many cards, they might go to other players around you. So everyone's kind of watching your turn, hoping that they get the dregs from your turn. And there's some really nice punishment in this game if you push your luck too much and go bust. The underrated pick here is Memoir, and the reason it's underrated is because it's a memory game, and yet this is one that I've had a really good time with. There's so many times I've looked at the shelf and I thought, maybe I'll get rid of this one, and I play it one more time, and I just have a blast with it. And it's a memory game, which I just find a bit crazy. This shelf is called Silly Dumb Fun, and that's just what it is. It's more party games, but really on the silly side of things, and shown best by Poetry for Neanderthals, which is just such a ridiculous party game where you are giving clues to your fellow teammates, but you have to do it in single syllable words. If you use a multisyllabic word, you get punished and you get hit on the head with the inflatable club that they somehow managed to fit into this box. Better than you would imagine from that description. Like, it really does work, and that's why it's still in my collection. The underrated pick is Scribble Time, which is now known as Picto Rush. And this one is such a brilliant idea. You have to draw these drawings, but in an insanely quick amount of time. So someone is just reading off 20 different things, and maybe like one a second. So you'd be like chicken, dog, cheese. You're having to quickly scribble them down to then remember them, which is for which number, because then they're going to ask you, what was number 17? And you've got to look at your scribble and remember what on earth it was that you drew. It's so hard to get it down quickly. Look at what you drew, and you just drew it like a minute ago, and you have no idea what it is anymore. I found this one at Essen. I wasn't expecting much. There's a lot of games you get at Essen that end up being useless, and this one was a real hidden gem for me, and I'm glad to see that it came back as now called Picto Rush. This shelf I'm calling Everyone's Happy because it's party games that just appeal to a lot of people and a big group. So when you're playing this game, everyone's happy. And the absolute flagship for this one is Herd Mentality. This is a game where you're all trying to think like the herd. So you will be asked a question, what's the biggest animal you could lift up? And then you're all gonna write an answer like pig, and you're trying to match other people's answers. So it's not always about thinking what you would think, but how can you be the same as everyone else? And if you match the biggest herd, you get points. This is just a simple take on those kinds of games. I previously had Hive Mind, which overcomplicates it. I've also played Green Team Wins, which I like. And there's some bits I like about that game more than this, but there's also some bits that I don't. There isn't kind of the perfect game in this realm, but I think Herd Mentality has such a cute look and theme and just so simple that you can play it with everyone. And that for a party game is often the most important thing. And the underrated pick is Catch the Moon, which is possibly my favorite dexterity game. You are building a tower of ladders to try and catch the moon. I love this one because it doesn't all just kind of end. It has these roller coaster type moments where, you know, things can fall off and collapse and you have a sort of thing that happens, you know, get excited about, but it doesn't end the game like with Jenga. Also, you don't have to prepare the game. You know, you start from the bottom and kind of work up from there. And then it has these great challenges that make you do tricky things. So you roll the dice, and if it tells you to catch the moon, you have to put the ladder, the topmost ladder, to catch the moon. And that is going to be really hard because you're balancing off of other ladders, and you're only ever allowed to balance off of 1 or 2 other ladders. So you create this weird mesh structure. It will sometimes fall down, and if it does, then you get a tier, and the player with the least tiers at the end of the game wins. So very simple, but rather than it just being like, oh, you knocked it over and therefore you lose, it actually balances out a bit more. Each can be punished a little bit throughout the game, but the person who did the best throughout the game wins, and I think that's just fairest. This shelf I'm calling After Eight. This is the big box party game that you play with a big group. And the reason I'm calling it that is because, well, you might play it after 8 p.m, but also if you're after a game for 8 people, except not all of these games play to 8 players, but let's not worry about that. The flagship here is Scrawl. This is a brilliant party game where you're drawing, you are then passing your drawing onto another player who then is kind of coming up with what they think it was of, and then they pass that phrase onto the next player, and they have to then draw that phrase, and so it goes around the circle like telephone. It gets more and more confusing, and then by the end of it, it's just something else entirely. That game was originally Telestrations. Scrawl took it and made it an adult version with better prompts. Both are great games, and I think Scrawl is just that bit funnier. And the best bit of the game is when you reveal the journey that it went on at the end, and you'll just kind of laugh at what happened and people's ridiculous drawings and interpretations. It really does need a big group, this one. I haven't played it in a long time because of that, but if you've got like 8 people, this is perfect. The underrated pick is Concept. This is one of the first party games that I ever got into, and I feel like it just doesn't get the love that it maybe used to get, possibly because things like Codenames and Just One have come along since it. You are trying to communicate something famous like Justin Bieber, or something simpler than a steamboat or a lawyer, and you're using very simple concepts to do that. So you can't talk, but you're putting down these things on a board that has all these different icons, sort of like clip arts. If you were communicating Morgan Freeman, you know, you might put it on the man icon, and then also on the movie icon, and then you're gonna get very complicated in how you give these clues, and the other players are just guessing. Just a really interesting challenge to try and communicate in these abstract concepts. And as the guessers, it's so funny, like watching it play out and just being totally lost for like 90% of it. Finally, like latch onto an answer, and it all kind of clicks together, and you're like, oh, what? That's what you meant this whole time. There's just a nice experience to Concept. Great family game. Great, you know, chilled out dinner party game. It's in the middle of the table. You take it in turns to give clues. It's not one that you're going to get really competitive over. Absolutely a game you could play at Christmas. I really want to get this back to the table. That's Concept. This shelf at the bottom is called Family Fun. These are the games that I think would work really well for families. They're just really easy to learn. Great fun. Not too long. Just a really good modern family game. And the flagship here is Survive, which is funny because it's not actually a modern game. This is from the 80s. Brilliant game about surviving an island that is sinking into the ocean whilst you've got sharks and whales and sea monsters trying to attack you and get you, and you are trying to get your people off the island. And you take it in turns to control those creatures. It's very much a game where you are being mean to other players. And I think that really appeals to certain families, you know, like it's reminiscent of more of the games that we might have played as kids of like, you know, Monopoly and stuff, where you do get to be a bit mean. And I think there's some joy in that occasionally. You know, you don't want to play every game like it. And I think Survive does it really well because everyone's being mean all the time. That's the whole game. So the luck kind of balances out a little bit. You don't feel too hard done by. Really great theme. Love the components. Simple rules. You come back to this one and it's got vibes of an older game, and yet it's somehow still a blast, even with like proper board gamers. My underrated pick is Riff Raff, which is a German dexterity game that I don't think ever made it to the UK or the US, but you can still get it from Amazon Germany. Has a rocking pirate ship that like you build this structure and it's on like a pendulum or axis and it's rocking around, and you are having to place heavy objects onto it so that it will swing, and you're trying to do it without stuff falling off on your turn. So you're trying to place it carefully. And it's actually got this interesting mechanism where you pick which part of the boat you're going to place onto this round and then reveal. You're trying to outthink the other players. Some bits are heavier than others, some of them are kind of hard to place, but the timing of when you put things on different sides is going to, you know, determine whether stuff falls off. It's a bit like Catch the Moon, a dexterity game that ebbs and flows. It doesn't just have like one big finish where it all goes terribly. You know, stuff will fall off and you'll take that as a penalty, but then you carry on, and I really like that. We're on to the second column, and this shelf at the bottom is called Murder on the Shelf because it's games with murder in. And I was hoping to come up with a better pun than that, some play on an Agatha Christie book or something. So if anyone can think of a better name for this shelf, please let me know in the comments. But the flagship here is Chronicles of Crime, because this is one of my favorite crime-solving detective games. What's different about this one is that you are using a phone app, and you are asking questions of suspects by scanning the QR code on them and then scanning it on a piece of evidence or another character to ask them about it. It gives you this freedom of what questions do you ask? So you could waste a lot of time in this game asking the wrong questions, but if you're efficient and you know to ask the right things using your hunch, then that's how you're going to crack the case. I just think that's so different to other crime-solving games, and it really makes you feel like a detective. The underrated pick is Paranormal Detectives, which is more of a party game murder mystery. It's a little bit like Cluedo, but much more fun, much sillier, because one player plays as the ghost, and they're trying to communicate who, why, where they got killed to the other players, but they're doing it in ghostly ways, like rearranging some ropes, or through a Ouija board, or by mouthing one word, or doing a little charade. And the other players have to take those little bits of information and piece together how they were killed. And what I like about this is it's more than just your Cluedo, it was the candlestick in the ballroom. You don't know what the parameters or options are, and every time you play with a unique little story. So you hear about like a pig or something.
A pig or pig. Write an answer like pig.
Somebody draws on your back what you think is a pig. How does that then mesh with everything else? So it has a little bit of a glimpse of like Chronicles of Crime or Sherlock games, because you still have to make those leaps of deduction, but it does it in a really silly way, and that's what I like about it. These two games at the end, Hollywood Golden Age and Santorini, don't actually fit the theme of this shelf, but I just didn't have any space anywhere else. And this shelf would perfectly suit Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective and Mysterium, but they are on the backdrop of my set, so like that's where they live, but if they weren't there, they'd definitely be here. This next shelf is called Moneymakers. These are all games where you're trying to make the most money, and I always found that to be such an appealing premise. I feel like it takes you back to playing Monopoly as a kid. There's just something about trying to be the richest person that just clicks. Maybe it's our capitalist society, but it somehow feels more important than just getting the most points. And the flagship here is Waterfall Park. Now, let's just take a moment to appreciate that Waterfall Park has no logos on the side of the box. But on the downside, the box doesn't close properly. And it's not like I've got any extra content in here. They lose marks for that. Waterfall Park is a negotiation game where you're trying to set up businesses in a theme park. Now, this is based on an older game from 1999 called Chinatown that I used to have. And I don't really like the new theme, but the reason I got rid of Chinatown and kept this is because they changed the gameplay in ways that I thought was better. You're trying to build businesses, you need to collect the right tiles and get the right spot to be able to build your businesses. And to get those things, you're going to have to trade with the other players. So it's all about wheeling and dealing, giving each other money, a classic pure negotiation game. And Chinatown was one of the best. And of course, Waterfall Park has inherited all of that, but it's made it a little bit easier to actually pull off these businesses. It's actually more adjacencies between the different spaces, and there's only two different sections of the board. So you're less likely to kind of feel down on your luck in this version of the game. It's also slightly shorter, and so I think it's just easier to get to the table. I feel like the bright, colourful, it doesn't really make sense to me that you're competing to make businesses in a theme park where surely that's all just owned by one company. I feel like they could have picked a better theme, but for me it's all about the gameplay, and I love this one. Oh man, oh come on. You've got to be kidding me. Please go back on the shelf. See, I hold this box for 5 seconds and I can't even get it back on the shelf because it's not been designed to be held vertically, which is a sin. Okay. The underrated pick is The Rich and the Good, which is also a reprint of a much older game. That was originally called Haben Gut. You could only ever get it in German. So this is really just an English version of that game, but many, many years later, the look is pretty much the same. This is a stock market game that has two cool things about it. One is that you are buying and selling these commodities and they're going up and down in value, but you're controlling their value by playing cards. But you share your hand of cards with the player to your left and your right. You can see what your neighbors are going to do. So if they start pushing one commodity, maybe it's a good time to buy that. You're really following the trends. I just really like that dynamic. It's very interactive. The other cool thing is that there's a mechanism where you have to give to charity. If you were the person that gave the least to charity at the end of the game, you lose the game. And I always love those mechanisms. There's a few games out there where it's like, you have to do this thing, and if you don't do it enough, then you've lost. Really like it in this, and basically any game I see it in. More games should have that mechanism. This shelf is called Modern Family because these are all great family games. And the flagship here is Sushi Roll, which is based on Sushi Go and Sushi Go Party, like the third one in that line, but they turned it into a dice game. And I think this is the best one of the lot. It's a game about trying to eat the best meal of sushi. The sushi is going around on conveyor belts. You will roll the dice and then see what's available. So you might be trying to get tempura or dumplings, and each of them score in their own way. And you're just trying to get the most points. And you can see the dice that are coming up ahead. You can plan for what you might eat now in the hope that you get that later. That's what I like about this dice game, is that you can see what's out there. It allows you to plan a bit better, but you're not guaranteed it because every time the conveyor belt moves, you re-roll those dice and see what you get. But there is a way to re-roll dice and also steal them from other players. I think it's a great family game because it's easy to teach because everything's out in the open. You can help other players like decide what sushi to take, and it's just a blast and like not long either. My underrated pick is Triqueta, and this is a great moment to tell you about my last video, which was my top 10 games of 2023, of which Triqueta was one of them. Definitely go check out that video. I'll tell you a lot more about Triqueta and 9 other games. This one is all about how greedy do you want to be. You're adding animals to stacks, knowing that you're going to take one of those stacks, but how long do you wait? Do you keep adding animals, or do you cash out before someone else takes it before you? There's a real tension to this game, watching the other players. Are they going to kind of spoil your good time by taking it before you get it? And you're trying to get these sets of animals. If you go one over the Triqueta, the 3, that's going to get you minus points. So it's a real delicate balance. I really like this game. Super simple, plays quickly, but just has a great player interaction to it. This shelf is called Tiny Twos because they're all 2-player games that come in small boxes. And the flagship here is Air, Land and Sea. This is got a war theme. You're trying to fight across 3 different battlegrounds, air, land and sea, and have the most strength in 2 of them to win that particular battle. The mechanism that I love about this game is that you can withdraw from battle early if you think the other player is gonna win, is doing better than you. If it's not going the way you want after you've played maybe 3 or 4 cards, you're not winning enough of the battlegrounds, then you can just say, no, I retreat, and they're gonna get less points because you decided to surrender. And you'll come back, you'll hopefully win the next battle, and then overall win the war. So it's a really interesting mechanism that you don't see in other games. The underrated pick is Fugitive, and this new edition comes in a tiny little box. This is very different from any other 2-player game you're going to get. One player is playing as the fugitive, and they are deciding which hideouts to stay at along their route before they can escape. And these are just numbers. So they might stay at number 2 and then number 5 and number 7. The marshal is trying to catch them. They're trying to deduce which cards they have available to them. So for them, it's very much a deduction game. They've got a whiteboard and they're crossing off the possibilities until they can track them down and get them. So it really rises to a climax, this game. Either you escape just in time, or you get caught. It's got a really great theme, and it's just so unlike any other two-player game. This shelf is one of my favorites. It's called German Efficiency, and this is because these are mostly German-made card games that just come in the most efficient small box possible. I just absolutely love that you can fit a brilliant game in this size box. And this is the flagship here, No Thanks, which now, sadly, in English comes in a bigger box than this, totally unnecessarily. It's just 30 cards and a bunch of little tiddlywinks. No Thanks is a wonderful game of trying to resist cards. So you don't want cards because they're negative points. On a turn, you will put a token on it to say, no thanks, I don't want it. And then so will someone else, and so will someone else. Until it gets to a point where you either run out of tokens and then you have to take it, or there are now so many tokens on that card that you can then take it because they will help you resist other cards later. You know, it's much better to resist a 25 than it is an 8 because that's 25 negative points at the end of the game. This is one of the best card games I've ever played, one of the best fillers, super simple, anyone could enjoy it. Like, I would recommend this to everyone. The underrated pick here is a game called Harvest, and I want to give a shout out to a website called travelgames.co.uk. I'll put a link in the description. What's great about Travel Games is that they are importing games that you wouldn't normally be able to get in the UK. It's a really good place to go to get niche games, and it has this feel of like a hipster vinyl shop because you're just finding out, or you can buy and access games that you just never be able to get in other board game retailers. They introduced me to this game. They sent me this game. I'd never heard of it before, but they said it's like the best travel game that you can get. And it's from 1992, it turns out. It's a Japanese game called Harvest. It's a game where you are planting vegetables into your field, but you're also adjacent to other fields. And for your vegetables to be able to harvest, you need 3 in a row. Your field is only 2 long, so you're going to have to plant in your field and their field. So you're working with the other players, but it's a competitive game. For you to be able to harvest tomatoes, if you put 2 of them in your field, you're going to need someone to put 1 in their field so that they harvest. But there's also these cards that can sabotage the other players. You can plant bad tomatoes so that they're going to get minus points. There's just this really interesting player interaction, and it can become a bit of a negotiation game. I haven't played it with all player counts, but apparently plays from 2 to 6. Just really interesting. This shelf is called Cardy Rae Jepsen because these are all card games, and out of respect to the pop star Cardy Rae Jepsen, who plays Catan, so she has a link to modern board games. You know, as much as I love Taylor Swift, she's far too busy to be playing board games. Although she could make a version of Wingspan with all her private jets. The flagship is High Society, which is a brilliant auction game from Reinoso, where you are playing as posh rich people trying to show off, get the best things. So you're spending your money to get all this stuff, but if you end up spending too much money at the end, the person who has the least amount of money is out. They lose. I love that kind of mechanism. And it works so great here in a really simple game, very quick to play, and just kind of real highs and lows. This threat that, oh, I really want to spend as much as possible. Have I spent too much? I'm not sure because everyone's money is secret in their hands. Just want to make a complaint here. Valbara has this. You should always have the name of the game on the smallest side of the box. Look, can't do that. Can't have that. That's useless. So there's only one way to have it, and it doesn't even have it that way, so you can't even really see the name. I hate stuff like this. Don't force me to have the game in your orientation. The underrated pick is Second Chance. This now looks different. They made it uglier, sadly. This is a brilliant Tetris flip and write game, one of the few flip and write games I have. It's from Uwe Rosenberg, where you're flipping over Tetris shapes, and you've all got to draw it onto your sheet, your square grid of paper, and you're just trying to fit it in as best possible. The winner at the end of the game is the person with the least space on their sheet. So I just love that pure simplicity of a Tetris game. That should be the goal of every Tetris game, is that you're just trying to fit it in perfectly. And if you ever have a shape come up that you can't fit onto your sheet, you get one chance to flip over, a second chance to flip over a card and hope that you can get that one instead, because some shapes are much bigger than others. So yeah, really nice. But there's also a kind of slight risk-taking element to it, because if you all end up with the same amount of space on your sheet, it's the person who finished first. So it does pay to be bold with it. This shelf is called Family Planning because these are family games, but with a bit of strategy to them. And the absolute flagship here is Carcassonne, one of the OG modern classic board games. One of the first games that I ever got into, and one that has really stuck around in my collection. You know, a lot have since come and gone, but Carcassonne has stayed true. It's a game where you are all collaboratively building up this map of Carcassonne with these cities and roads. You're putting down your meeples onto them to score, getting in each other's way. And I think the thing that really appeals to me, the tile laying is enjoyable, building this thing together, but it's about the fact that you're sharing this map together. And as the years have gone on since this, games have become a bit more personal in terms of you're doing stuff in your own realm. There's not so many games that are about the shared board, and I feel like Carcassonne strikes that balance of player interaction beautifully. I slightly prefer Hunters and Gatherers, which is a slightly later version of Carcassonne, because for me it's a bit more cutthroat, and that's kind of my style, but I've just got to keep Carcassonne around because it's just too good of a original game. The underrated pick is Nuns on the Run, which is a quirky hidden movement game, and the twist with this is that there's more people hiding than hunting. So one player plays as like the older nun that is walking around the convent, and the others all play as novices that are trying to sneak out of their bedrooms, get their secret thing that they're trying to get over the other side of the convent, and get back to their bedroom in time before they get caught. And so you're all running around in secret, writing down your movements, working on your own because you're trying to be the fastest to do it. But the other players are kind of holding you back because if too many novices get caught, then it's a win for the older nun, the hunters. But it's just crazy how it works so well that you can have this hidden movement game with lots of people hiding. There's one or two like janky rules with the line of sight in this game. I wish there was a modernized version of it, but I played it again recently, still love it. Love the comical theme of it, and I just love to have kind of a quirky gem in my collection as this. So many of the kind of quirky games have long since left my collection. When I first was getting into games, those first 5 years, I was really hunting down on BGG the stuff with the interesting themes or stuff that was just a bit on the cusp of being normal or popular even. And Nuns of the Run is one of the few that's actually stuck around because I played it and I do still love it. This shelf is called Adventure Time. They're all games about exploring and adventuring. And the flagship here is Clank, a deck building adventure. This is a game about going into a dungeon, trying to get the most gold from a dragon and get out again before it kills you. And I love that push your luck mechanism to the game because it's the heart of what you're doing. The further down you go, the better riches you'll come back with. But will you actually come back at all? Because as you play the game, you're making noise or clank. The dragon will be attacking and you'll be pulling these cubes out of the bag. And every time they draw your color, that's going to hit your health and get you closer to death. And if you die in the dungeon's depths, that's it. You're out. You lose the game. It's a real balance of how quick do you run away. If someone's a real coward, that can kind of speed up the dragon attacks. Because everyone has got their eyes on being greedy and so they stay in as long as possible. But I do want to say that this box is terrible. Like, it looks like I've taken it everywhere. It's just got so much, it's just so scuffed. It's just such bad quality. Like, I don't have a single other box in my collection that looks this bad. And I don't feel like I've done anything different with this game. My underrated pick is K2, which is a game about climbing a mountain. It's quite an old game now. I just feel like it doesn't get spoken about in the same sort of breath as some of these other games. I really love the risk-taking of this that really fits the mountain climbing theme. You're trying to get as high as possible. If you can get both of your climbers to the top, you're probably going to win the game. You get loads of points. But there's this weather that's going on. Of course, the climate and the top of this mountain is terrible, and you really have to time your ascent. Can you survive? Can you keep your acclimatization levels so that you don't actually die? Both of your climbers could die if you're too much of a risk taker. So it's a real balance of being really bold, like a mountain climber would be, versus actually staying alive. And other mountain climbers are getting in your way as well. This bit I'm calling big egos because these boxes don't fit on these shelves, which is ridiculous because there is loads of depth in this bookcase. And yet these boxes have decided they needed to be so big that they don't fit. This is Western Legends, a game that I love against my better judgment. And here, That's what happens when I put it on my shelf. It sticks out. That is disgusting. If you're a board game publisher and you send me a game that sticks out like that, I'm starting off by hating your game, and then we're going to have to work back from there. But of course, I love these games so much that despite the fact that they've ruined the way my collection looks, I've still kept them anyway. So Thunder Road Vendetta, Western Legends, Colt Express Big Box. Thanks for nothing. This is another shelf of annoyances that I'm calling the Flat Shelf Society, because all of these games have to be kept flat or they just fall out everywhere, like everything goes everywhere. Merchants Marauders, that's because I've got an insert, I'm trying to fit the expansion and it's all sleeved and there's just way too much stuff in there, so it only stays in if it's flat. Thief, it came with a bunch of Kickstarter extras that I try to cram in the box. Same situation, terrible insert. And then Lords of Vegas, I've got like poker chips, like a separate set of poker chips in there that make it just really heavy and the box just cannot hold it, so it all just falls out. So that's partly my fault. Board games should be kept vertically. That is my belief, so that you can access them easily. Don't ever fall in love with someone that keeps their games horizontally by choice, because they're probably a murderer. This shelf is called Klask because it has Klask on it. And Klask is a dexterity game, 2-player, that's a bit like air hockey, but more of a board game. You have these magnetic sticks that you're controlling. You're trying to hit the ball into the other player's goal. But you also have these magnets in the middle called biscuits. And if you're not careful, they will attach to your stick and then give the point to the other player, and then you reset and go again. It's a very fast-paced skill game that I'm not particularly good at, but it is like fun to play occasionally. And I said in my collection video that I don't like any flicking games or have any. Well, I guess Klask is sort of a flicking game and I like that, so there's that. This is the Negotiation Station. These are all negotiation games, a genre that I absolutely love. I don't get to play it as much as I'd like because it's not a genre that everybody loves. It can be kind of a cutthroat, mean type of game. You're trying to get the most you can from other players. There's often backstabbing involved. The flagship here is Sheriff of Nottingham, which is probably the lightest negotiation game on this shelf. This is a family type game where you are also bluffing. You're trying to take goods into Nottingham and get them past the sheriff, but you take them in this secret pouch, and then you're trading or negotiating with the sheriff as to whether he will let you through, because he could open the pouch and see that you've got contraband in there, but you could just pay him a bribe so that he doesn't open it. Of course, you could pay him a bribe and he could still open it anyway. And if he opens it and you weren't taking in contraband, he has to pay you. The original theme, this game used to be about smuggling goods across the border of Mexico, and that for me is way more fun than this theme. But the gameplay is awesome, and it's a really great negotiation game for sort of everyone. My underrated pick is Spartacus, a game of blood and treachery, which is based on a TV show that I've never watched. It's a beast of a game where you're negotiating with other Roman houses, acquiring gladiators, and then putting them into battle against each other. You're betting on the outcome of that battle. They might get decapitated. You're backstabbing other players, making short-term alliances, and just trying to be the most powerful Roman house. Brilliant theme that really comes through in the game. It's totally unlike any other game that I've ever played. Very mean. It needs the right group. It's very long, but if you've got the right people and you're willing to get into it, it's brilliant and I absolutely love it. This shelf is called Couples Therapy because it is full of wonderful 2-player games, a lot of which I love to play with my wife. This is the definitive size of a 2-player game. If you're a publisher making a 2-player game, it should be no bigger than this box. It should fit on this shelf. And if it doesn't, then I hate you. This is the flagship of this shelf, Patchwork, a brilliant 2-player game, kind of the original Tetris game, where you're trying to fill up your patchwork quilt with Tetris pieces in the most neat possible way with no empty spaces, because empty spaces are going to get you minus points. It's a great push and pull 2-player game. Loads of cool ideas going on, but yet devilishly simple. I just want to point this out here. This is Blitzkrieg and Caesar. They're both designed by Paolo Mori, and they're both from the company PSC Games. And here they are on the shelf. They're bigger than the other ones, which I hate, but fine. I had to make my shelf bigger to fit them on. They don't match. They're the same line of games, but the icons here are a different size, and the logo here is a different size. And then we move down to Watergate and Match of the Century from the same publisher. the same line of games. And here the logos are different sizes. This one is brighter than this one. And this bit is different. If you're making a line of games, make it look nice on the shelf, please, I beg of you. Star Wars at the end there, you know, doesn't fit the size. I hate that, but whatever. The underrated pick is Sobek 2 Players, which is a 2-player version of a much older game called Sobek. This is by Bruno Catala, possibly one of the only games of his that I have. It's a game about collecting sets of stuff in an Egyptian market. The tile that you take will determine what direction on the board they will get to go in. And so you can see what they will then have up for grabs. So it allows you to look ahead and make plans and think, oh, if I take that, then I'm going to let them have that, which is way better, and I don't want that. So there's a really nice level of thinking ahead in this game, but also a nice bit of chaos as well. There's some special characters that you can get. Also, there's a timing of when you sell your set, because if you sell a set instead of taking a tile, that might allow you to avoid giving something really good to the other player. I'm surprised that this game isn't more popular. I love it. This shelf has some space for another great 2-player game, but nothing has been worthy of it at the moment. This game, King and Assassins, should be on it. It's a 2-player game, and it doesn't fit because this is some stupid deluxe edition. I've actually traded another game to try and get the older version of this, which will then fit on the shelf. And I'm really quite excited about that. It's very sad. This is arguably the better version, but it's in a bigger box and it shouldn't be. So I'm gonna downgrade just so it will fit on my couple shelf. This shelf is Verbal Treasoning, which are all my hidden traitor social deduction games, of which I don't get to play nearly as often as I'd like because they require a big group and people that are willing to play those sorts of games. But I do love them in my heart. I love this, trying to bluff, lie to other people's faces. And the flagship here is the Resistance. This was the first one I ever got into. It takes the game Werewolf and takes out the player elimination and just makes a game where you've got these spies that are in the midst of everyone else. Everyone's trying to work out who the spies are. The Resistance, the good guys, are trying to complete some missions successfully, but if they take the wrong people on the missions, if they take the spies, then they're going to sabotage them, and then the spies are going to win the game. It's a very simple game at its core. It's all about the conversation above the table, whether you can lie to each other, whether you trust each other, and it creates loads of conversation and accusations, and that's what I love about it. And really, most of these games are like that. My underrated pick is Good Critters, which is actually more of a negotiation game, but hey, it fit on the shelf. This one used to be called Tiefer Taschen. It was a German game that meant deep pockets, and it had a political theme, which I much prefer, about greedy politicians. These guys took it and put anthropomorphic animals in it, which I hate. It's about being greedy mobsters. One player is going to be the boss, and they're going to divvy up some money amongst the players. And then you're all going to vote on whether you agree with how it's happened. You're going to be taking secret actions. You could be stealing from other players, but then you could block them stealing from you. There's a lot of like backstabbing and negotiation in this game. And you're just trying to come out with the most money, which for me is always fun. This shelf is called Classy Classics, and I guess we're just running out of good name ideas at this point. But these are all games that I love. Some of them modern classics, like Pandemic, which is a game about trying to save the world from 4 deadly diseases. And it is the definitive cooperative game for me. It's all about short-term firefighting, trying to stop the world from dying from all these diseases, versus long-term planning of trying to work together to find the cures that you actually need to win the game. I think it's a near perfect game. I've got expansions for it, and I've also got 2 other versions, Iberia and Fall of Rome, that are also brilliant in their own ways as well. My underrated pick is Spring Meadow, which for me is the best multiplayer Tetris tile laying game there is. This genre was started by Patchwork, which is from the same designer, but that's only 2 players, and sometimes you want to play with more players. There's loads of games like this out there. I think this one just does it the best. This shelf I'm calling Old Town because they're all set in ancient towns or cities. And the flagship here is Foundations of Rome, which is a massive box. I'm not super in love with the huge production of Foundations of Rome, but the gameplay itself is awesome. It's a city building game where you're building Rome. You are placing buildings down that you control, and they're going to be scoring off adjacent buildings on the board. So if someone else puts down a residential building, you could put something next to that that's going to get points off of it. So you're really reacting to how the city develops, and you're building a city collaboratively, which is just so rare for city building games where you're usually building on your own. And the gameplay of this is so smooth. You might look at it and think that it's this overcomplicated Kickstarter game, but it actually has the feel of a classic German Euro game from like 20 years ago, because there's great player interaction. Your turns are really simple, you've got really simple options, but there's this strategic depth behind it all. And my underrated pick is Empire's End, which was in my top 10 games of last year. This is all about trying to keep a civilization going in its final stages. It's all falling into ruin. You've got disasters left, right, and center, earthquakes and famines, and you are having to fight them off by paying resources. It works like the filler game No Thanks that I talked about before, where you're putting a token onto a card so that you don't have to take it. And at some point, someone's going to take it. And there is benefits to taking it, as long as it's got enough resources on it, because that's going to allow you to avoid disasters later on. And it allows you to build a bit of an engine to rebuild your civilization. It's a game where you start off with this perfect empire, and then by the end of it, half of it's on fire. And I just really like how different that is to other games. And maybe it's the masochist in me, but I like getting beaten down by a game, and it's the player that prospers just a little bit better than everyone else that wins the game, which feels like an allegory for modern life. This shelf is called Dire Straits. These are all games where you're under attack or things are going wrong. And the flagship here is Dead of Winter, a game that is set in a zombie apocalypse where you're trying to survive. You've got a band of characters that you're trying to keep alive. And you've also got your own secret objectives. You're trying to collect enough guns or books or gasoline. And you won't tell the other players that you need that, because you're trying to keep the group alive, the colony, because if you don't, you're all going to lose. But you're also trying to do your own thing, because you can't win if you don't complete your own objective. I love that dynamic. And then on top of that, there can also be a traitor in your midst that is basically trying to kill morale, ruin things for everyone, and complete their own objective as well. And if they do that, then they win on their own. So there's a lot of conflicting going on behind the scenes, and it puts this air of mistrust. There's a nice narrative thing to this game as well. There's these crossroads cards that will activate when you do certain things, but you don't know when they're going to activate. And you get this little vignette of a story that is very thematic to a kind of zombie movie. And then it gives you this moral decision that you've got to make. Like, you know, do you kill this horse to eat it? Or do you keep it, you know, because it's going to help you, but then you've got to feed the horse? And so it puts you in these interesting situations that I really like and just really enhances the theme of the game. My underrated pick is Dark Moon, which is also a big box hidden traitor game. And it's actually inspired by this game here, Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica is like the definitive huge hidden traitor game where there's a few spies in the midst and they're trying to ruin everything for everyone else, but you're all trying to survive. And Dark Moon is a simpler version of that, where you're on this moon base, things are going wrong, and some of you are secretly infected, and the infected people are trying to kill everyone off, and you're trying to work out who is infected and who you can trust. And the great mechanism in this game is that you roll dice behind your shield, and you contribute with these dice. And if you're bad, you might contribute bad results, but the dice are weighted towards bad. So a lot of the time you're good, and you're going to have to throw in bad dice. You're forced to do it. And then you're having to explain to everyone why you did this bad thing and say, no, honestly, you can trust me. And then, of course, they want to quarantine you, which weakens you because they think you're bad. But if they quarantine a good guy, then that makes things even worse for everyone. It's very cinematic, thematic game. I really like the tensions that it creates. And finally, down here, we have That's Life, which is a shelf full of games with a theme that I really enjoy, which is like real life or trying to live the perfect life. So the flagship here is The Pursuit of Happiness, which is kind of like a modern game equivalent of the game of life, where you are getting jobs, relationships, doing activities, collecting possessions, everything that is going to make you as happy as possible. And it's trying to strike the right balance. You have this time, your resource is time. And how are you going to spend that time to most make you happy and give you the most happiness points? I just love the conceit of that, and I really like how this game plays out. You can get a job that will get you loads of money, but money can only get you possessions. And I've played this game where I stayed in my job for too long, had so much money but then didn't have anything left to spend it on. And I didn't have enough time, because when you've got a really busy job, you don't have the time to then spend on other activities. So I should have retired earlier. And it's really interesting that when you lock yourself into a job or a relationship, or you have kids, it locks up your time, which are like workers in this game. So then you've got less workers to spend, and you're still producing happiness from these things, except for your job. Then you've got less options in later rounds. So the game sort of speeds up as it goes on. Love that theme. I think this game turns it into, you know, a mediumly complex game. And my underrated pick is Dream Home, which is a really cute family weight game that I think would appeal to a lot of people. I think the theme's really nice, it's got cute artwork, and it's got surprisingly interesting decisions, I find, in this game. You're picking from these columns of cards, one of which is going to be a room that you put into your home. The other is kind of this special card that might score points in a certain way, or help you twist the rules slightly, or they're bits of decor to put into your rooms to get you extra points. The placement of the rooms is quite simple, but that selection of the cards is a little bit reminiscent of Cascadia in the way that you have to pick a pair together. There is thought to everything you're doing, and yet it's really, really approachable. You know, anyone could understand this game, and I just love the theme. So that's the end of the collection on this bookcase, but I also have games in my backdrop that are in the backdrop of every video that I make. So they're on a different bookcase. We've got Cascadia, Parks, 3 Sherlock Holmes consulting detective games, Mysterium, QE, Paris, La Cité de la Lumière, and Railroad Ink, the Blue Edition. Those games are just what looks nicest in the background of my shot. I'm sure they would fit onto these shelves in certain categories. I love them just as much as I love these games, but they're just not over here. That is my board game collection in 2024. If you've got any better names for my shelves, then please let me know in the comments. Or if you've got any ideas on how I could organize it better, I'd love to hear them. If you want to watch the extended version of this video where I talk about every single game, then become a patron of the channel at patreon.com/Actualol. And if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. I'm John Perkis, thanks for watching.